Welcome to Life Unscripted with Rosabel and Reid, the podcast where real stories, raw conversations, and unfiltered thoughts take center stage. We're your hosts, Rosabel and Reid Zofeld, a wife and husband duo navigating life's twists and turns with curiosity, humor, and a deep love for storytelling. Here, nothing is off limits, from personal growth and identity to culture, books, relationships, and the unexpected moments that shape us. Life Unscripted is about embracing the real, the messy, and the meaningful. So, grab a coffee, get comfortable, and join us as we dive into the stories that make us who we are. No scripts, no filters, just life. Unscripted. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Life Unscripted podcast with Rosabel. Joined as always by my wonderful co-host Reid. Today we're diving into a fascinating topic that I believe blends medicine, history, evolution, and the relationship between sickle cell anemia, malaria, and how human populations adapted over time. Now, before I say anything, Reid, tell the public here, the listeners, about how we came out about this topic. What was the inspiration?
Okay, so this was something that I've thought about for a while when we were discussing it. And so I was fascinated when I learned that sickle cell anemia was a mutation within the body, and then the populations that actually developed sickle cell anemia, connecting it to Africa as well as like South America, and specific to those two predominant populations. And what I was thinking about was, for these, it was a one mutation like the blue eye gene from Europe that then came from one person and spread all over the place? Or was it the separate populations in which the human body actually developed the exact same mutation in two separate groups? And the more research I did on that, the more I found that it was two separate groups that developed the exact same mutation. That was fascinating to me when it comes to the human DNA, that you could put them in two separate areas, give them the exact same issue, and they come up with the exact same answer.
Right. So this is one of those topics that I think science meets real life in such an unexpected way, because most people, when you think about sickle cell anemia just as a disease, but actually, according to your research or what you read on it, it started as a survival mechanism, right?
Correct. And that's what I even took out from that, because if you think of the average age of a person who can survive with sickle cell anemia is what? Maybe as late as 40, really. But if you think about the human body, that's really as long as you would need for humans to actually be able to survive in those times. So the human race would still be able to continue, even though this was not necessarily the best way to do it, but it would prevent the human race from actually dying off. So that's really the fascinating part about the whole thing.
Right. So we're going to break it down. So we're going to talk about why this genetic mutation appear in different parts of the world, like how sickle cell anemia developed as a defense mechanism or defense actually against malaria, and why or what this tells us about the human evolution and survival. So let's get started. So let's try to understand sickle cell anemia and its genetic mutation. First, lay the groundwork. So again, what comes to mind when you hear, if you were thinking, okay, sickle cell anemia?
The first thing that comes to my mind when I think sickle cell anemia is short lifespan. And that's really what a lot of people probably would think, because the first thing that comes to mind isn't necessarily the complications that come from having sickle cell anemia, but more of the fact that it does mean you have a shorter lifespan than the average person.
Right. So for those who, just heard sickle cell anemia but don't know much about it, so it is a genetic condition with the red blood cells actually take on a crescent shape, like a moon shape, instead of the usual round shape that the red blood cells should have. So this actually causes blockages. It reduces the oxygen flow, and then it leads to pain episodes. I mean, me working as a nurse, I know many, especially, and it started early. That's what I'm saying. And so I remember many, many years ago when I used to work on a pediatric unit, and I see these children that will come in with this pain, actually screaming, because, it's a lot of pain. So it's pretty rough, especially how it's passed down genetically, and whether it's inherited, like one or two copies of the sickle cell gene. If you have one copy, then you're the carrier, which means that you have the sickle cell trait, but not major symptoms.
And then when the person has 2 copies, it means that you have blown sickle cell disease, which again comes with the serious health challenges. So, Reid, being a carrier isn't necessarily a bad thing, right?
No, typically, when you look at most diseases, the carrier isn't necessarily the end-all, be-all. It's just that when you put 2 carriers together.
But that's what brings us to the next segment. Why this mutation appear in the first place? Can you tell us? I mean, what is the malaria connection as a deadly disease and life-saving mutation? You tell us more about that.
Well, when you think about the connection, being that I can't really go back to when it was done, the way I would view it is just like any other mutation that the body has taken on as a defense to survival. And of course, this means that someone would have had to have had malaria, then survived having malaria to develop the gene. It could be created just like during the time of the Black Plague.
Right. So we know that malaria has been one of humanity's deadliest enemies, right? So do you know how malaria spread?
Well, that's mosquitoes are the typical one, but it could be more than just mosquitoes that spread malaria.
So malaria is actually caused by the Plasmodium parasite, which actually attacks the red blood cells. And this is still a major killer, especially in Africa, India, and even parts of Latin America. So I want you to explain our listeners, how do you think, or how does this sickle cell anemia tie into this?
Tie into what?
Sickle cell and malaria. What's the connection?
Okay, the connection between the two?
Yes.
For me, the connection is the fact that if you look back at human history before they were transversing the oceans, you had 2 independent populations that had to deal with malaria.
Right.
And I mean, it still is going on today. So it's not to take light of what the malaria or sickle cell anemia in any way, but it's the idea of you have humans surviving, having malaria, which the percentages weren't very good. But over time, with the survival rates, eventually the body will actually develop a defense mechanism. So you have to have this be exposed to this specific element for so long, and then the body will naturally say, well, I need to figure out how to get over this because this cannot be going, you can't have it in your life.
Right. So the incredible part is that people that have sickle cell traits, basically the carriers actually end up being more resistant to malaria, right? Which mishappens the blood cells and make it harder for the malaria parasite to survive. So...
Well, this is also part that when I was thinking about this whole entire aspect. So if you take the concept of where human life started, okay, so you're talking about Africa into the Middle East and then spreading around the world. And that would mean that the elements of the individuals that are in actual South America getting malaria, they wouldn't have necessarily started in that area. They would have eventually went to the South America, but eventually what started in Africa, Middle East area. So the DNA original structure would have been the same. And that's why I think it's fascinating that over thousands of years of travel and transversing the world, that part of the DNA structure that was the same between Africa and South America, the body still creates the exact same adaptation to deal with the exact same.
Right. Yeah. So basically, because of natural selection, people with this mutation were more likely to survive and pass it down. And that's why we see it in multiple places around the world. Now, let's talk about how migration and genetics spread this mutation. For example, Reid, do you know why sickle cell anemia is found in some Hispanic populations versus? Tell me, why do you think is that?
Honestly, if you look at it from the point what we were just talking about when it comes to malaria isn't prevalent within the Northern Hemisphere. So if you think about Europeans and you think about North America, you wouldn't find very many mosquitoes, and a lot of life ends up dying off in the winter time period. Where if you look at Africa and South America, their seasons are more consistent year round, and mosquitoes can actually be around the whole time.
Well, what I know about this is that the Atlantic slave trade actually is what brought people from Africa to the Caribbean and Latin America, and then for where the descendants still carry the gene today. That's why we don't see as much as in places like Europe and East Asia.
You're talking about how it was brought over to the United States. Okay.
No. What it was brought into the Hispanic population.
Oh yeah. Very familiar with that aspect of it, and that is how it would have gotten to the North America. But I was more referring to when I said that European population, sickle cell anemia for the most part doesn't exist within there, as well as.
You mean Europe and East Asia?
Correct.
Right, but
it does exist in Asia at some level because they do have temperate climate.
because they didn't have the same malaria risks, you know?
Correct.
There was no evolutionary pressure for this mutation to develop.
Correct.
So instead, different populations evolve other defense against the disease common in their environments.
Correct. And that's the same reason why you'd see pigmentation differences, because the lack of sunlight in Europe led to a lack of pigmentation within the skin for Europeans, whereas if you look at South America and Africa, more pigmentation due to the exposure of the sun. It's how the human body actually develops over time is very fascinating when it comes to what you see today.
Right. But here's what I find interesting. So to me, this mutation was actually beneficial in the past, but unfortunately today it kind of causes major health problems. And why do you think is that?
Well, I mean, it causes major health problems because, well,
is it because people live longer?
Yes, and that's what I was gonna say. So if you think about, I don't know, 500 years ago, someone living to the age of 40 would not have been considered abnormal.
Right.
You know, you had people living into their 50s and 60s, but someone dying in their 30s and 40s wasn't that hard abnormal for some.
It wasn't a huge issue, right?
Correct.
Because today, you know, with this longer lifespans, you know, it causes major complications.
And that's where you really see the difference, is because the average lifespan being about 72 years old. Now you start talking about someone dying in their 40s, which
right.
And that's where you see it as an issue today in society. And of course, it is something that they need to figure out how to actually resolve. But it's a very difficult one, since it was a genetic mutation that's actually taken over many years.
So again, once it was a survival advantage, and so now it's definitely a medical challenge, you know, because also modern medicine has changed the game. You know, we can now treat malaria now. We don't now, or like, okay, we don't need this mutation anymore. But I want to tell you something. Speaking of modern medicine, have you ever heard of Dr. Manuel Alquim-Patarroyo?
I've not heard of that.
Yeah, I don't think so. So let me tell you who he is. So he happens to be a Colombian immunologist who actually developed the first synthetic malaria vaccine. It's actually called the SPF 66. And so you will probably ask, okay, how do this connect to, you know, sickle cell and evolution? Well, his work, it's important because if malaria can be controlled through vaccination, then the evolutionary pressure that led to the sickle cell mutation could disappear over time. Fewer people would need the sickle cell trait for survival. So again, are we at a turning point where medicine is now replacing natural selection? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think there's an attempt, but I also think that natural selection and the body's mutations, I think, are more amazing than modern medicine.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, but I think they you know.
Well, no, I'm saying not downplaying modern medicine, but if you look at the instance with sickle cell anemia, that is a very fascinating natural thing that has happened in order to preserve life for the human race long term. But then again, if you look at modern medicine, now you're able to actually pull out genes from DNA structures to figure out, is someone going to be more predetermined for cancer? Is someone going to be more, going to be taller, going to be shorter? Are they going to be heavier as they get older? So, I mean, being able to identify these genes is a lot of work. And the more we understand it, just like the one with the breast cancer gene.
Right. And I know you were talking about the genes, but I also want to continue on that, you know, what I was mentioning to you about that vaccine. So that vaccine, the SPF 66, actually had mixed results. But what it did, it actually, it paved the way for the future malaria vaccines. Guess what? Now there is one, I don't know if you know, it's called Mosquirix. I think it's called Mosquirix, which actually is being distributed in Africa. So, I mean, that's amazing because, you know, it makes you wonder if we can eliminate malaria, and then therefore could the sickle cell gene eventually disappear?
Well, and this is the thing, when it comes to disappearing of the gene, this is where I don't think the individual that's already been born would be able to do that. I think because altering your DNA structure
right
would be a very difficult undertaking. However, putting some marker in place in your body in which you can tell your DNA, so when your children are born, don't pass this gene on through the process. Could they do it? I don't know. I mean, that's a very hard undertaking, but somewhat being able to block the gene before you can actually pass it to your offspring.
Right. And then the human body, it's in constant change, you know, based on what it needs to survive. And then we can also see in other examples too, like, you know, for example, how some populations develop lactose intolerance or high altitude adaptations, you know. Do you think scientists could one day use this knowledge to like engineer better disease resistance?
I think the first thing science needs to do is take a step back and respect the understanding that human populations, these weren't changes that happened over hundreds of years. These are changes that happened over thousands of years. And just the sheer notion, if we go to South America versus where they would have originated, let's say in Africa or Middle East area, that was thousands of years. So by the time you saw the South American population, you're talking about a 3,000 to 5,000 year difference in maybe hundreds of generations.
Well, I do know that some researchers are already looking into whether we can replicate protective mutations without the harmful effects. But you're right. We never know what comes after because, again, this is something that, what we know now is not, we'll probably later in time we'll learn other things. And who knows, what human evolution will look like in the future,
Well, but also look at the mutations. Sometimes the body does get it wrong. So they might be developing a mutation for something and there's an unexpected result. And I don't know if that's going to be true, but based on something that we discovered, there's the one gene I'm talking about that we discovered about me. It's how it looks for me is it's a duplicate, but the duplicate isn't harmful for me. It's a normal thing. When the genealogist was talking about that with geneticist was talking about that, they were showing other examples of this same duplication creates other results.
Well, it's amazing because I remember a lot of things that were said during that time, but one of the things I heard is that if you're talking about genes, when it comes to that, you rather have a duplication of a gene that actually don't have a gene per se, like missing a gene for whatever reason. I don't know the exact details onto that. That probably will be something that we need to look more in depth because, genetics is an amazing, topic, Oh,
yeah. And that's why when you think of all the, I'm sure it's been talked about much of medicine. In the United States, the rise of certain sicknesses, illnesses, trying to get to the root cause of it. And again, those can be a lot of genetic things as well, where the body's trying to make an adaptation for something that they see in the environment. And it just might not be working out the way they want to. Just like with sickle cell anemia, you start talking about the painfulness of the person who is experiencing it. That might not have been the most ideal thing for the individual, but they were able to survive. And that's what's like we see with cancer. You see it with a lot of other areas. Autism is the body doing something that we don't know behind the scenes based on the environmental factors that's being played into.
Exactly. It's the body doing something that we don't know now that perhaps it will actually help out later. It's like is it the bigger picture, So yeah, all of this is super, super interesting. Do you have anything else to add regarding malaria and anything?
Well, yeah, all I know is when looking at the historical aspect of migration and looking at the populations that were infected, I was honestly looking all different directions because knowing about the Polynesians and how they were constantly going around the world, and they were known to go from South American coast to all the way over towards the Horn of Africa. So they made over thousands of years a lot of journeys, and that was one of the things I was constantly thinking about. And then, of course, thinking about the Spanish and the Portuguese. How early did they get to South America? Were there any actual continental journeys between Africa and South America before before the first Spanish explorers came? So there were so many things, because when you start thinking about aspects of Newfoundland and the Vikings, then you realize, okay, they're talking about Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, Finland, explorers making it all the way to Canada, which turned the heads on a lot of things when it comes to history. So were there actual explorations? But the genetic thing that I found with my research when I was looking at it was there are actually adaptations that you can see within the actual structure to see what population actually developed it. So there's some blood marker that you could look at, and it will tell you whether it came from the African side or the South American side.
Do you like this topic? I'm just curious. Did you like this topic because it has to do with history? What's part? Because I'm more into, I like history. It's more that medicine part. Do you like it because it has to do with the whole history and the whole?
That's part of it. Part of the reason why I like it is, yeah, there's a historical aspect of it, but trying to look at the DNA structure of the body, human body is a marvel. And I think everyone can agree with that. And it's just the idea of having a controlled study like this, it wasn't a study, but a controlled group, two separate, developing the exact same outcome, separate, never knowing about each other, not being involved with each other. Only thing that you could say they would have in common was the initial foundation of their DNA structure. But yet the human body sees the exact same challenge, and that comes to the exact same conclusion, even though they were thousands of miles apart. It's just fascinating.
It is. It's truly fascinating. Well, this has been the Life Unscripted with Rosabel. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into a little sickle cell and malaria and evolution, a little bit of it. That if you did enjoy this episode, make sure that you subscribe and share it. Please go to our website, www.Rosabel and then you can also find links there where you can, subscribe to our, either Spotify or Apple Podcasts as well. You can find me on X with Rosabel. And you can also find me on Instagram. Actually, it's Rosabel Unscripted. On Facebook, I am either as Rosabel Unscripted, and there's also an author page, Rosabel that Unscripted. So somewhere in those lines, you can definitely find us on social media. And by the way, Reid, I want to tell you, recently I did my book signing, my first book signing event, which I'm doing a lot more of those in the coming weekends. And you were actually there with me. Did you enjoy it?
Oh yeah, it was a lot of fun. Seeing our little girl walk around and pass out cards, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was, because I actually have people that came to the table to ask just because they saw her and they were like, oh wow, she's great at marketing. And a lot of times I was just having a conversation with someone about the book, and the next thing somebody will come in here. So your daughter just went out there and told me she's selling books, or this is for the podcast my mommy does.
Honestly, who could turn away a 4-year-old?
Yeah,
I mean, she's just super adorable.
Yeah, well, she really is. She was just out there, and I mean, sometimes I'll be honest with you, sometimes I feel a little bit because I don't want people to think I'm just like putting her out there. I'm not telling her to go to no one or tell her to. She just does it because she loves it. She was like, Mommy, I want to help you sell books. She was also trying to bring her own little books and said, Mommy, I want to give this. I said, no, yeah, we're not doing that.
She's just a fun little girl.
She definitely is. And we want to hear from you. So again, thank you for, being here with us. Thank you for being supporters. Please let us know anything in the comments. So until next time, I keep learning, stay curious, and remember, life is always love unscripted.
God bless America. Sorry, it took me a second. And support the troops.
That's it.
No, there's one more thing I want to mention.
Oh, okay.
I mean, daylight savings time and spring and forward. Just remember, hopefully you reset all your alarm clocks. A lot of the stuff automatically happens on the Sunday morning, but don't be late to work tomorrow.
Okay, that's definitely good, solid advice. But if you do get to work late tomorrow, I'm sure but only one day, right? That one day, because you can't do that all week.
Well,
right?
Yeah. I mean, it's trust me, it takes a few days.
It takes a few days, but after a while, your boss probably be like, okay, it's about time for you to.
Yeah, I mean, them talking about getting rid of daylight savings time would be really nice.
Yeah.
I mean, the fall is great, giving an extra hour of sleep, but in the spring, needing to wake up an hour early, that's never fun.
See, I never had that problem in Colombia. I never had to worry about, moving the clocks forward or backwards or anything. It was like always the same time, so.
Do you know who came up with the idea of daylight savings time?
Some president.
Benjamin Franklin. You don't remember the national treasure part?
Probably, I don't know. But, hey, we're supposed to be good.
Hey, what can I say?
What can I say but you're welcome? Okay.
Oh, exactly. What can I say but you're welcome? Give me a chihu.
Okay. Chihu. Until next time.
Have a good night.
You too.